Welcome to our study of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. Can someone just confirm if the sound is all right? As you can maybe see at my from my gestures, I'm having some doubts. But it was also partly to do with not actually starting the webinar, so that might be a large part of the explanation. Yes. Okay, I think we're good, right? Sound is okay? Okay. All right, so here we are with a truly precious pith instruction on the practice of the path. So kindly generate the awakened attitude to intending to put this into practice in conjunction with our vow, our commitment to establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect liberation. So we'll invoke the wisdom body of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind treasures, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity. Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So we're presently in the chapter which presents the necessary conditions for the practice of the path, which are what then is referred to as the four wheels, which are a conducive location, a teacher, aspiration, and merit. So we've looked at the first two, and we're presently then looking at aspiration. And that's where the intention, the determination to be free from confusion entirely is our aspiration. And last time we ended up looking at how when we aspire to liberation, to not get caught or sidetracked. So presently then we look here, this verse 57 then says, directly then, for all the five great poisons of defilement, the powerful treatment is to ride upon the chariots of the three kinds of beings. Throughout the four times, freed from weariness, you will see all things as Dharma and your teacher. These will be the causes of omniscience, whereby the excellent aspiration is fulfilled. So now what we have with Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary is one of these where you'd almost want to write this out in gold. I was just reading it before. It is so crucial and so sublime. So this really explains, you could say, the entire notion of what we're doing with the path in terms of its increasing subtlety. And this really constitutes, like, encapsulates the entire scope of what we're doing on the path. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, mindful of the three scopes or categories to which spiritual practitioners belong, the Buddha, our teacher, set forth three kinds of path. So we're probably familiar with this, and we sometimes probably would associate these with what we could call the three yanas, but it's not really that. It's actually more than that. The first is, and we're going to be looking at that, but I just want to sort of give you an idea of what comes. So it is really the three scopes are then the wish to be free from suffering, just simply as that, higher rebirth, if you like, to go to heaven. The next is much more informed. It's understanding where suffering comes from and wishing to be free from samsara altogether. But really just thinking in terms of, I must get out. The last one is the superior one, and that is the one that understands how even the notion of the self that wants to be liberated is a limitation. And that's the understanding of the nature of emptiness, and with that also the wish to also be free from nirvana, to also be free from that, you could say, serving one's own narrow purpose, and basically oblivious to the cause of other sentient beings. And this is then the last that we refer to as the Mahayana aspiration. So these three scopes is then what's going to be discussed here. Okay, to compare any of them is compared in the root text to riding the chariot of skillful means. Each of them is a direct and powerful antidote to the poison of the entire range of defiled emotions. Indeed, a path that does not counteract the afflictions is not a Buddhist path. So that's, for example, if we're really just intending to do better, and we think it might come about without actually doing anything in terms of liberating, freeing ourselves from what really is the cause of suffering, namely, certainly on the immediate level, namely our kleshas, our toxic impulses or emotions. If we think that there's a path that is possible without doing something about that, well, it's certainly not then a path to awakening or the Buddhist path. So beings of the first scope know that actions motivated by the three poisons will thrust them into lower realms and therefore reject them, if only for the time being. And so that's where the scope that we have in most religions really is the moral recognition of destructive emotions and destructive actions, kleshas and karma. That's common for, you could say, the moral compass for most persons, and particularly then, of course, it's the scope of what we classically refer to as religions. And that is then what is seen to be the cause for higher realms, higher rebirth, and so forth. Beings of the middle scope know that the root cause of the sufferings of existence is clinging to the self, and consequently, they overcome affliction by eradicating this clinging. So that's already going into a rather sophisticated recognition that the entire idea, and here we're very much within the realm of what the Buddha taught, understanding the truth of no self. That we have right from the word go, really, in the Buddhist teaching, in terms of understanding the emptiness of self. But still, there might still be what we call the cognitive obscuration that still holds on to a subtle sense of self and a subtle and a belief in what we could call the indivisible particles in terms of the phenomenal world, the world out there. So that's where but nevertheless, on the basis of this understanding of no self and not particularly attachment to the phenomenal objects, then there is the possibility of eradicating the cause of suffering. Yet, beings of the great scope purify the afflictions by realizing that they lack true existence, or else they make positive use of these same emotions by applying them to the profound stages of generation and perfection, or again, they employ the method whereby the emotions self-liberate, that is, dissolve by themselves. Okay, so that is then the scope of the Mahayana, and the Mahayana path then is implicitly the realization of recognizing shunyata, that there's absolutely no inherent existence with any aspect of neither what we could think of in terms of the subjective or the objective. There's definitely a set of causes and conditions that make appearances happen, and that we have, but there's no unitary, unchanging, truly existent essence, neither in the terms of what we could call consciousness or in terms of the objects that we perceive. So the entire idea of a solid self and a solid phenomena out there is entirely absent within the vision then of the Mahayana. And this is then the beings of the great scope. And implicit to that, as a natural ramification of that, there's no sense of just this personal nirvana, and hence also the bodhisattva, the person of the Mahayana, is dedicated to the well-being of sentient beings infinitely. Now, this is then on the basis of realization in the Mahayana. Then there's increasingly profound ways of engaging this. So the general Mahayana is the insight into the lack of inherent existence, emptiness. Now, this operates from the point of view of the self that clings to the self. So that's where this view then operates with the ordinary mind. But there's also the view that comes from recognizing that intrinsically this mind, in that it essentially is a delusion, it essentially is imbued with a core that is undiluted. And it's this core that is then engaged in the practice of the Vajrayana, where this Buddha nature, this core, this luminous essence, or whatever, however we refer to it, the undiluted mind, is engaged skillfully in what we then call the resultant vehicle that takes what we call the result of elimination, the natural abiding purity, taking that as the path and engaging that through the practices of what we call then generation and perfection, which are then the development stage that recognizes all perceptions as intrinsically abiding within the purity of the ground and hence as pure, seeing all phenomena as mandala and deity, and the perfection stage in which any reference point whatsoever is dissolved into the primordial ground. And seeing these two as inseparable then is the profound way of the unity of generation and perfection. So that's the Vajrayana approach, and particularly then the most profound aspect of the Vajrayana are then the approaches that we have in the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen tradition, which is then where we understand that the very nature of the appearances is from the very ground. You could say it doesn't move, and as such, all conceptions that arise without leaving any trace. So that's then where we would, applying this method, we would say the emotions or the movements of the mind, the dualistic perceptions as such is recognized as not having any reality whatsoever. They self-liberate. Let's see what the Padmakara people they say, but I hope let's hope we agree. After that, better be consistent with what they say. I'm sure they have something. They have something important to say about this. This applies to the practices of Vajrayana overall, yeah. So, now, like I said, this is something we could write in gold because we really have here something that is so rare, actually, a complete, you could say, a place in which the entire Buddhist vehicle, as we are heirs to it, as we receive it from great teachers in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, pretty much is outlined here within just a very few lines in a very pithy way. And then having that exact overview of the path, then Kangyur Rinpoche goes even further in terms of just how this is applied. Of course, drawing on Jigme Lingpa's words, but really pith instructions. And hence, then it says here, injunctions really in terms of our practice. It says, do not remain enmeshed in the thoughts of the past, nor go to meet those of the future. And do not allow your present mental state to be pulled this way or that by different circumstances. Instead, practice constantly and without tiring, confidently allowing all that should be eliminated, and even the antidotes themselves, to fall away into the fourth and ultimate time of equality. So this is the pith instruction about practice, not as just something that we set aside, like here now I'm practicing, now I'm not practicing, and so forth. Simply just going to the depth of what is happening with our mind at every micro moment of our existence, at all times, without tiring, simply applying the antidotes, the practice of the path, whatever it might be, to have that without you say, being overly tense, without being slack, but just with constancy through doing that such practice where even the practice itself is left without any, you could say, as something that's naturally liberated. We say there's a confidence that grows that's even independent of the practice itself. And so that's where all the various risings of the mind, they are freed naturally, and they then abide. And this is where, again, falling not into the thoughts with regards to memories of the past, anticipation in the future, presently being distracted, and arriving then at what we call the fourth moment, which is without any engagement or being in any way corrupted by the ordinary distracted conditions of the notions of the three times. And here actually there's a very And this is profound. I'm not actually sure. I'll have to look up who is KJ. Anyway, what is said here. What we call time is an imputation relating to the sequence of moments as perceived by every being individually and posited in relation to a point that is actually being experienced. This is labeled the present. So when we have experience, we would say, okay, in reference to what is happening right now, I call this the present. The past and future are the names given to preceding and subsequent events, respectively. And that's why we could very provocatively say, nobody has ever experienced the past. Nobody has ever experienced the future. Try and think of it. There's never ever been a time, because anything that we would, you could say, identify as objects of knowledge would necessarily have to take place in the present. We have never experienced, and nobody has ever experienced the past. We only experience the present. We might think in terms of past. We might think in terms of future, but these are thoughts that take place right now. So think about that. Time in itself has no intrinsic existence of its own. Just as when dreaming, the mind arranges temporal sequences of different length, in the same way it assigns events to the past, present, and future in the waking state. So this is discussions that are not just, of course, Buddhists. They also are. We have discussions that have taken place between Einstein and somebody called Henry Bergson, or Bergson, he was French. And there's very much the understanding that time is so relative. So this is not just in the Buddhist context, this is a recognition. Particularly Bergson is famous for his positing how time is entirely a conceptual construct, constructed by the individual. It's relative. On the ultimate level, however, in the fundamental state of things, no phenomena terminate in the past, no phenomena occur in the present, and no events supervene in the future. Again, coming back to the basic immediate experience of where we are, it's not as if there is anything that comes into true existence. To be learned in the three times, then, means to understand their equality. So that's where we understand in the present moment, then the concepts, past, present, and future. Yes, they are there, they're concepts, but in fact, they all take place within this present moment, which also in itself is not necessarily in any way can be ascribed in terms of past, present, and future. Hence, all these notions of the three times are seen to be concepts. They're equal in that sense. With this in mind, then one can then go on to posit the so-called inconceivable fourth time. And this is then the scope of meditators, in addition to the past, present, and future. Doesn't mean that meditators, they lose track of time as such, but they just understand the irreality of this. And then the meditators then, recognizing this condition of the fourth time, and then you could say the time in which they live, also understand then this being an unchanging dimension. And yes, it could be understood as the reality that's lived, but at the same time, it's not in any way held as something of substance or an object. So that's what is referred to as then to be learned in the three times. For one understands that the temporary and spatial categories are mere imputations, and one integrates the ultimate reality, the equality of everything. So this is very much where Kangyur Rinpoche hands to us, and Jigme Lingpa hands to us the empowerment, the encouragement to embrace this vision and make this one's experience. In this way, by virtue of your reflection on the Dharma and through the instructions of the teacher, everything you perceive by means of the six consciousnesses will impress upon you the truth of impermanence, and when it will inculcate a determined wish for freedom from samsara, together with a sense of compassion and devotion. So on the basis of this, understanding the teaching, applying it, then also understanding that whatever we perceive in terms of our five senses as well as what occurs in the mind, understanding all these perceptions really continually are just telling us these are in fact just how that these are impermanent, and with that continual message of all our perceptions being understood in terms of their impermanent illusory nature, then we also understand how beings suffer. This generates then compassion as well as also appreciation for the teacher and devotion. So all these factors will bring forth the wisdom of omniscience, the full accomplishment of your excellent aspiration. And it's then on the basis of this vision then that we engage, commit to the path, and also aspire to the attainment of enlightenment. Okay. So this was then aspiration. Now we're going to look at the supreme protection of merit, the fourth wheel. '58. The joy of seven qualities enjoyed in higher realms, high status graced with freedom and an absence of disease, concentration and a wise discernment. These five are certain signs of merit gathered in the past. So we're going to look at five things that really constitute merit, that constitute having the conditions for practicing the path of liberation. And again, we understand the incredible rarity, preciousness of this. Kangyur Rinpoche says, there are five things that, on coming together in a single living situation, are indisputable signs that in previous lives one has accumulated consistently and with devotion a great deal of merit. Let's just be clear on how we should understand merit, because merit is a bit more than just good karma. We could have very good karma on the basis of really good heart, and we could be born into wonderful circumstances and yet not get close to liberation in any way. On the basis of aspiring to liberation, we could actually have unfortunate circumstances that prompts us to engage in the path of liberation, and that would actually be regarded as merit. So that's where merit has this thrust towards, it's the good karma, you could say, that has the thrust towards liberation, the path of liberation. So as far as these then go, then the first of these is to enjoy the seven qualities of the higher realms. Vasubandhu enumerates them as follows: longevity and perfect health, beauty, fortune, family, wealth, and clear intelligence are seven qualities. The second factor is the perfect attainment of high samsaric status, exempt from the 8 conditions in which there is no freedom to practice the Dharma. So that's why we could be born into realms, of course, of intense suffering, but we could also be born as long-living gods, as well as several other conditions, 8 in all, and we've looked at these previously, that essentially prevent us from being able to practice the Dharma. So right now we have this high samsaric status in the sense that we have the right conditions, the freedoms where we can practice the Dharma. The third is the absence of ill health. So of course we can practice the Dharma even though we might not have perfect health, but this is something that can be very helpful. So that also is a reflection of merit. The fourth is the ability to concentrate and thus to create a flexible and positive state of mind. This also, even though we might not be able to the inability to concentrate doesn't mean that we can't practice the Dharma, but nevertheless then having then the ability and training our mind to concentrate and to have a mind that's workable is also then something that is associated with great merit. And the fifth is the intelligence to understand the meaning of the teachings. So again, this is possibly something that we don't have right away, but this is something we can also cultivate. And this then is something that is tremendously helpful for us on the path to actually understand the meaning of the teachings. So that's where we, as we engage in the path, then continually are seeking to really understand reality, understand. 59. But without training, knowledge will be brought to ruin. Through swelling pride, the glory of the trainings will be brought to ruin. Through hatred, every virtue will be brought to ruin. And by desire, your perfect high position will be brought to ruin. So things might be good now, but without actually, you could say, investing the inheritance that we have, then it might not, there's not a given that this will lead to some greater place. It's not as if we're on a sort of ever ascending trajectory, which is sometimes sort of part of some beliefs. And it's not that uncommon actually to think, oh, what it was intended that I should learn this in this life, and I will be wiser in my next. There's absolutely no such a given that we are being wiser at all. It entirely has to do with us being proactive in the process. So there's very much the possibility, just because we have a great inheritance doesn't mean that we're forever going to be wealthy. It's all about how we invest, how we wisely apply the merit that we have. Kangyur Rinpoche says, it may be that with the help of a little study and learning, you might realize that virtue is to be adopted and non-virtue avoided. But if you do not train yourself, that knowledge will be lost. If you take pride in your social status, erudition, appearance, and so forth, the wealth of the teaching you have received and studied, as well as the three trainings, which is discipline, concentration, and wisdom, will not remain with you, and all your virtue will be brought to nothing. Most especially, merit is completely annihilated by anger, as Shantideva says in the Bodhicharya Avatara. This is the first stanza of the 6th chapter. All the good works gathered in 1,000 ages, such as deeds of generosity and offerings to the blissful ones, a single flash of anger shatters them. So there's various ways in which this can be interpreted, but the bottom line is anger is something immensely destructive. So the merit that we have right now is not something that we should count on will always be there. And as far as our practice on the path goes, then it's necessary that we apply ourselves wholeheartedly without necessarily having that sort of sense of resting on our laurels or whatever. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, and it's further said in the scriptures that desire is the ruin of discipline and destroys even the attainment of divine and human status in the higher realms. And that's again following after our various kinds of desires, again, something that is famously bringing us down. 60. Thus, to have a mind that's undisturbed by karma and defilements and misdeeds, to be, through strength of wisdom and good fortune, well disposed, all of these are sign that merit has been gathered, as the ornament explains. Okay. Your present situation, in which you are able to use your body, speech, and mind in a wholesome way, is evidence that you have accumulated merit in the past. You have attained a human form, which is the basis for the practice of the Buddha Dharma. You have attained a wholesome mind, undisturbed by karma, defilements, and the wrong behavior of thought, word, and deed. You have the ability to discern what has to be avoided, and you possess the methods for doing so. So right now we have everything needed. There shouldn't be a sense that, well, some people, they just are so calm and so whatever, and I just can't do that. That's so wrong. That's where what we have right now is every possibility to accomplishing that in every degree. So there's never any sense that we are stuck in being one way or another. And then what we, of course, are aspiring to, and what is the sign of a practitioner, are these qualities of a mind that's not disturbed by habitual patterns, not disturbed by the kleshas or toxic impulses. If we look at sages, we see persons that are completely clear in terms of their mind, in terms of what they say, in terms of what they do. So this is then where we arrive at that through the discernment of what needs to be done and what it is that has to be avoided. He says, finally, you enjoy the fortune of receiving the sacred teachings. So that's what comes from that. As a sutra alamkara, and that's what's meant with the ornament, it says, joy and birth, endowed with freedom, absence of disease, ability to concentrate, intelligent discernment, all these qualities, signs of merit gained in previous lives. So these are qualities that we might have. These are qualities that we presently are in a situation to cultivate. We presently have the conditions for having this now and in the future. So 61, with firm defense of their commitment to the Dharma, those who put forth strong determination, cure for any doubt that they might bend strong Indra's bow, the practice of the ocean of Dharma deep and vast, will walk unerring on the paramita path. So determination here, we'll see the commentary on it. Curious. Indra's bow, by the way, is Indian poetic language for rainbow, but it seems to then be associated with an overall understanding of the path. So here we're talking about the foundation really of the teaching, which is what we sometimes refer to as renunciation, which is then the determination to be free. And that's where then on the basis of practicing the path that we can proceed on the paramita path, which is then the path that takes us beyond delusion. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, yet it's not enough merely to see the importance of the accumulation of merit. Your mind should be powerfully focused and determined to practice the teaching of the great vehicle. This should be like a suit of armor, so strong that you will not forsake it, even at the cost of your life. After hearing and reflecting on the teachings, the vast and profound ocean of Dharma, you should arrive at an incontrovertible certitude and draw the teaching into yourself through meditative experience. A giant of tremendous strength will be able to bend the bow of Indra if he has the courage and does not hesitate. Okay, so this is where Indra's bow, which is sometimes referred to as a rainbow, obviously here refers to this mighty weapon of the great god Indra, which is then the god of, well, in the Indian cosmology, Indra is sort of the god of war, but also the god of strength. So not just aggression, war in the aggressive sense, but strength. In the same way, you should be confident that if you are persistently determined and brave, you can assimilate and practice the Buddha's teaching in their entirety. You can, with the help of antidotes and countermeasures, overcome all adverse conditions. So that is where we should have that strength and determination. There's nothing that we can't do in terms of the application of the teaching. Then it will be just like throwing wood on the fire. The more difficulties arise, the firmer will your resolution be. Whatever defilements occur, the more powerful will the antidotes become. And we can look at great teachers, particularly in the modern times where, for example, teachers in the Tibetan tradition have undergone, especially the last generation, underwent indescribable difficulties, the horrors that no one actually can ever imagine. And yet, so many of these teachers emerged really even more sublime on the basis of these conditions. So it says here, your following of the path will never be overpowered by mere circumstances. Neither will your practice be complacent and slack, and your every action of thought, word, and deed will contribute to the practice of the 6 paramitas, becoming thus the cause of final omniscience. So for someone that applies the path, then the circumstances that one meets with will become fire for the will nourish the wisdom, the capacity to integrate all circumstances on the path, and one will proceed then on the practice of the 6 parameters. Questions? How can one contemplate the impermanent and illusory nature of space, position? Well, actually, we would say these kind of phenomena, they're not compounded phenomena. So they only exist as imputations. So as such, then we would say all phenomena, both the compounded and uncompounded phenomena, of which then here we're talking about space as the uncompounded, and position, if we're talking about substantial phenomena, then as substantial compounded. So both uncompounded and compounded, they are imputations. They're dependent arising. Of course, one space as such, you could say, is permanent phenomenon, but it's still phenomena that's imputed. It only exists as understood as something that is space relative to what is not space. So we say it's a dependent imputation, but still we will refer to this as dependent arising. Or does contemplating on time does the trick, since there is no time without space? That's true as well. Any you could say objects of our knowing is necessarily taking place within the 3 times. Any time we objectify something, this is just really appearances that when we think in terms of the 3 times, they have some reality, but settling then again from the point of view of the 4th time, there's merely just appearance without necessarily attribution of any kind of solidity. I feel like I want to cry for joy, listening to this, what we can accomplish and overcome. Yes, it's very encouraging. This is so wonderful. And this is also where, on one hand, we have the wonder of the teaching itself, and then also we have, say, the embodiment of the teachers. Okay, 62. All acts of cleansing and all gatherings of merit, like offering of the 7 branches, water tormers, and the rest, are in harmony with such a path. Adversity will not bring low the ones who practice in this way. They tread the path relying on their merit. This then is the mainstay of the path of beings of the greatest scope. So that's where, when we understand this, this famous, so important to unify what we call the 2 accumulations, which is then the wisdom that understands the insubstantiality of phenomena ultimately in reality, and yet also humbly acknowledging the degree to which we are caught by our relative experience, and within that the need to accommodate our dualistic experience through the accumulation of the conditions for us within this relative reality to proceed on the path. So that's where any relative practice, and the relative practices we can very often sum up in what we call the 7 branches, or the 7 branches of puja, Yinla Dumba, and that is then bowing or homage, offering, parting with our destructive patterns, rejoicing in the practice of others, requesting the teachers to teach, requesting them not to pass into nirvana. So that's where these kind of practices that we do in so many different ways, offerings and bowing and so on, water torments, the Ryu Sanche, all these relative practices, the practice of all these aspects of the path, both in terms of the sutra vehicle, with the general offerings, and particularly then in Vajrayana with all the skillful means, then all of these really enable us to accumulate these two aspects of merit. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, To follow the path, fortified with the armor of determination, also includes the accumulation of merit through the 7-branch prayer, a formula expressing such things as refuge and so forth. So refuge here being when we bow down, and ranging from the slightest meritorious acts, such as offering water torments. Water torments are interesting in a way. These are, and I have only seen it done on 1 or 2 occasions, but it's basically that you take a mold, a tsatsa mold, and you dip it into water. And of course, as you do that, something does take shape. And then again, you lift it, you have actually created something. It's right away gone. But again, you put the tsatsa mold down, and again, you're creating a form. And you offer that, and then you let it go. Anyway, I don't know the details of it, but this is an interesting concept. Then you also have the burnt offerings, like the Ryu Sanchu or the Sur offering, burnt offerings of various kinds. We have white, vegetarian, we have red, non-vegetarian, all these offerings that we offer to spirits of various kinds. To major ones like the gift of your very own body, as we do, for example, in the practice of Chöd. Implicitly also we do this in the general mandala offering. Conversely, it includes the purification through the use of antidotes of every fault down to the most trifling actions committed in dreams. This is where if we actually commit negative actions in dreams, we actually would want to purify these when we wake up. If with mindfulness and meticulous vigilance and care, you assess your actions correctly, adopting what is to be adopted and repudiating what is to be repudiated, given the things we need to give up, down to the slightest gesture of your hands, the mouthing of a single syllable, or the conception of a single thought, you will not be brought low by any adversity threatening your practice. And that's where we can actually see how our body language and how even the things that we say and the attitude behind the things that we say, we can see all sorts of little sort of workings that take place, and we should be aware of it. Not that we have to be incredibly self-centered and absorbed in ourselves, but we should be awake. We should know what's going on with ourselves. So with this awareness of these aspects of our being, which is body, speech, mind, then we know what is helpful and what is not helpful. Knowing then, we can say applying this knowledge, awareness of ourselves with the methods that we've been taught, then we can, as it says here, you will not be brought low by any adversity threatening your practice. Everything you do will be transformed into the perfectly pure practice of the path, the all-important accumulation of merit. In conclusion, the correct application of these 4 wheels of training is the fundamental basis of the path of great beings, the Bodhisattvas. So this then concludes this chapter with the 4 wheels, which are then location, the setting, the teacher, the aspirations, and merit. So these then constitute, say, the auspicious constructive conditions for our practice of the Mahayana path. Okay. The foundation of the path, refuge, chapter 6. So let's see. Jigme Lingpa says, in the troubled ocean of 3 fears, the worthy and unfailing refuge for the faithful is the triple gem, renowned as a white parasol. On entering the teaching, one must first have trust in it. So we generally say we take refuge out of fear, just like we have refugees that escape a war zone and seek a safe haven. Similarly, also we're escaping the war zone of samsara. And the implication here is that what really is the safe haven is that we escape delusion and we come into a condition of truth. We wake up, and that's what the Buddha represents. That's what the Dharma represents, and it's this objective that we share with our fellow refugees, the Sangha. So we have something that shades us from the burning heat of samsara sufferings, and the essential prerequisite really of that is trusting. If we're going to get in some boat that will take us across the Adriatic Ocean or whatever in escaping a difficult situation, then we want to have somebody who we can genuinely trust. So similarly, also in the Buddhist path, we rely on the guidance of the Buddha. Sentient beings, driven by the power of their karma to wander through the realms of existence, live in dread of a multitude of dangers. They fear samsaric suffering, which is opposed by the path of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. So this, then we understand, the general suffering of samsara is then what we escape through the lower vehicles of the heroes and the solitary Buddhas, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. That's where simply there's just, we want out. So this is the Buddhist path that takes us out of suffering because we don't want the suffering. Now, less generally, Bodhisattvas dread the attitude of self-concern, which is so much at variance with the path of the paramitas. And that's where we say that first they fear samsara. The Bodhisattvas, they dread nirvana. They dread the singular retreating into a personal comfort zone of liberation. And that's totally antithetical then to the Mahayana path or the path of the paramitas. Most particularly, the practitioners of the secret mantra feel the menace of a deluded clinging to phenomena experienced as ordinary. Again, the antithesis of their path. And that is again where the practitioners of the secret mantra sustain this vision and the experience of wisdom. And they fear falling into the condition of delusion. And this is where the practitioners of mantra invoking wisdom at all times through the various practices, the development stage, completion stage, the great perfection, and so forth, continually then sustaining this vision which is free from delusion. So that's where the sort of falling into seeing things as ordinary is then completely antithetical to the Vajrayana practitioner. That's why Vajrayana practitioners, one would say, it is so tricky with the Vajrayana path because we inevitably do fall into that delusion. That's why it's so important to continually purify that. So that's why the Vajrayana practitioners, they continually operate with the awareness of falling back into ordinariness and continually work with restoring this, particularly then through, say, practices such as feast offering and so forth. Taken together, beings are constantly tormented by these three perils, as though buffeted and engulfed by the waves of the deep, the lair of dreadful monsters. And though the gods, like Indra, may be thought of as protectors, such deities are deceptive refuges, for they are also bound within the world and are thus not immune to such dangers themselves. So sentient beings caught up in these three perils, what we looked at here, the suffering, the narrowness of those that are not bodhisattvas, and particularly also those that are fall into the delusion of ordinariness. All of these kind of styles of delusion that perpetuate suffering, they won't be helped by those that normally we would think of as incredibly powerful. Those such beings such as Indra and so forth, which is really the epitome of powerful beings within relative existence, these themselves they are themselves held by confusion. So by contrast, the only true object of refuge, true in being genuinely able to give both immediate and ultimate protection, are the rare and supreme ones, known more poetically as the three jewels, the infallible guardians for those who perfectly trust in them. So the rare and supreme, that's the Tibetan word for the three jewels, is actually Konchok Sum, which means rare and precious. So these are then what we refer to as a reliable or infallible refuge. Kangyur Rinpoche says they are renowned throughout the three worlds of existence and are like a white parasol that gives shade from the heat of karma and defilements. At the very outset, upon embracing the Buddhist teaching, it is essential to take refuge in them, for it is proclaimed in the 70 stanzas of refuge. The Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the protection for those who yearn for liberation. So we presently suffer on the basis of this ignorance that then drives the experience of our clinging to the self and the toxicity that's associated with self-clinging, what we call the kleshas or defilements. And these defilements and then drive our particular patterns of action, which is then what we call karma. And then it's continual, that is, on the basis of this duality, the defilements, they're only creating causes of suffering. The actions, then the karma is then continually creating conditions that are founded on duality and delusion, and hence also, ultimately also, continually bringing about suffering. So this condition altogether needs to be remedied, and that's where secondary or sort of the temporary patchwork solutions, they won't do. There has to be really going to the very depth of the problem, and that's from that place then that we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Faith as the cause of taking refuge. So stanzas 2 and 3. Undeceiving refuge is itself the pledge to be the basis of the path that leads to freedom and the vessel for its qualities. Before embarking on it, therefore, we must understand the qualities of both the teacher and his teaching. The root of every good is faith itself, and this is unpredictable in beings' minds. On meeting with the teacher or on reading in the texts, it floods the mind. The hairs upon one's flesh stand up. Okay. Let me just see here. Okay. So true and unfailing refuge in the three jewels consists in a commitment. The commitment to be a basis in which the path to liberation can unfold. In other words, to undertake the practice of the three trainings, thereby becoming a vessel for all the qualities of elimination and realization. Let's see what the footnote says. One should perhaps be aware of a tendency to interpret refuge in a theistic sense, involving a reliance on a kind of supernatural power. The idea of taking refuge in the Buddha naturally involves an expectancy that the Buddha will bestow protection. He does indeed. But this is not some sort of ready-made liberation handed down as a reward. The Buddha does not grant salvation. He explains suffering and the causes of suffering and expounds the path to freedom. It is for the disciples to follow. They in turn are liberated from suffering by understanding its nature and themselves uprooting its causes. Thus, rather than being an appeal to divine grace, the true taking of refuge is the commitment to undertake the path whereby the disciples liberate themselves. So that is then the true taking of refuge, this commitment to the path, which, as we can see here, leads to the qualities of elimination and realization. These are then eliminating the aspects of confusion and unveiling the innate qualities of Buddha nature. An attitude of faith is the necessary preliminary for such refuge. And in order to cultivate this, it is necessary, it is vital to understand the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the sacred Dharma, his teaching, and the qualities of the Sangha by whom this teaching is upheld. And that's very important, particularly for us modern people who then hear the word faith and we think, oh my God, faith, that's where I'm supposed to just be a good boy or a good girl and just have faith. But the point here is, and this says here, to cultivate this, it's vital to understand the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So that's where there has to be a critical thinking that goes in and takes the whole, you could say, accumulation of our attitudes, education, conditioning, whatever it might be, and really brings this to the project and see, okay, well, how does this relate to everything that I've been taught, everything that I sort of habitually assume, and so forth, so that there's a complete engagement, that we're not developing faith as sort of the nice little white part of who we are, the little angel part. Has nothing to do the sort of the white part that sort of would like to get away from the dark side of things. And that's why it's important to both bring in the dark and the whatever baggage there is, and skepticism, critical thinking, all of that, cynicism, all of that, bring that to the table, really. And then understand, really completely engaging our being and critically understanding what is it we have here? Why is this reliable? Why is the Buddha reliable? And it's on the basis of that then that we arrive at an appreciation of what the Buddha is about, what the teaching is about, what the quality of the Sangha, or certainly what the Sangha aspires to. That's where then this taking refuge can be undertaken with faith, on the basis of genuinely trusting. Just like we don't just have faith in somebody on the first encounter, but it's through a long association with somebody that we then begin to see their true colors. And if their true colors really are true, and so forth, or rather their true colors are what is reliable and so forth, then we have faith in them, then we trust. So it says here, it is in fact a general principle that faith is the sole root of everything positive. What do I have to say about that? Obviously, the English word faith has connotations deriving from the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is used here to translate the Tibetan word depa, which certainly shares some of these connotations, but extends beyond them, as is explained in the text. The Dasha Dharmaka Sutra and the Ratnakuta are alike in saying, green shoots cannot come from roasted seeds, and perfect qualities will not arise in faithless hearts. So that's again coming back to this, just having a simple-minded faith, like, oh, I really like, I really like the lamas, they're so nice, or I really like the feeling, the vibe, whatever. And that kind of simple-minded faith, as nice it is and it's sort of innocent as it might be, it doesn't take you very far. And without really having that deep appreciation, then not much will come from it. So that was this point here. Okay. Any questions? I'm not really giving you much time for questions since we're already, time's up, but in case you have some urgent question, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just conclude and dedicate. All right. Thank you so much for joining our class here today. Yes, and also, by the way, when you do have questions that come up, just write them down. So even if I go, if I go a little bit over time or whatever, then they'll be sitting there, and I'll try to incorporate them. But I can also see if there are no questions. That's also where I'll just keep going, actually. Anyway. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So, thank you.